Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Grace called FMA. Oh, I have been looking forward to doing this review. See, a few months back I covered a song as a world hit for Billboard Breakdown called You Don't Own Me, which is a remake of a classic Leslie Gore song from the mid-60s and was actually updated pretty damn well for the modern era. And ever since then, with the song crossing over to the States, I've been trying to keep an eye on Grace Sewell, known mononymously as Grace. If you recognize that last name, it might be because her brother Conrad has also had some major world success as the vocals on Kygo's Firestone, or his breakout solo hit Start Again, thus being the first pair of siblings to hit #1 on the Australian charts with different songs. And I'll have to admit, I was intrigued by that. With You Don't Own Me, it looked like Grace was able to tap into the smoky side of vintage soul that leans more towards Amy Winehouse than Meghan Trainor. And the fact that she actually brought in Quincy Jones himself to update the production is all the more evidence that she might be a formidable artist in her own right. And while some of that would come from being part of a family of musicians going back to her grandparents who actually toured with the Bee Gees, it did seem like there was some formidable talent here, as I said. So I checked out her debut FMA, which stands for Forgive My Attitude. So what did we get? Well, man, I wanted to like this album a lot more than I did. Again, I feel like I have to keep on restating that I do like it when retro pop is done well, and Grace is making a fine effort with FMA, but it doesn't entirely stick the landing, mostly because it can be painfully obvious which lane she's trying to follow and when it really doesn't work. It's a decent debut album, let me stress this, and I think she definitely has a lot of promise, but you can tell there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to refine and focus the sound. Again, a good album, but not a great one. And nowhere is that more apparent than with Grace herself. So let's start there and clear out the elephant in the room. It's painfully obvious that if Grace isn't consciously trying to imitate Amy Winehouse, she's definitely an inspiration in terms of vocal technique, image, and delivery. And honestly, I don't mind that. I was never the biggest Amy Winehouse fan when she was alive, but she was a very gifted writer and performer in retrospect who very much embodied the film noir femme fatale, who actually had seen and done everything that was said about her, which gave her rasp a lot of subtle power. Grace, unfortunately, isn't nearly as subtle as she needs to be to pull this off, and it's clear that she's trying a lot harder than she really should to embody this image in her voice. And that sort of weathered persona, balancing out fragility with deeply buried but very powerful emotions, that's not something just mimicking the vocal affectations will capture, no matter how much your production wants to follow in that vein. I can tell where she's trying probably harder than she needs to. Some of this just needs to come with experience. Now, granted, you also need to keep in mind that Amy Winehouse was working with producers who knew how to exactly balance that vintage retro sound with modern touches. And the list of producers that can pull this off is really slim indeed, which can be a real problem with this album. It's very telling that when Quincy Jones shows up for the cover of You Don't Own Me, this guy's a veteran who's worked with Frank Sinatra and Michael Jackson. It's got more depth and balance than any other song here. And you know what, I'll give them credit for trying, but the vocal fidelity always feels way too clean to blend in with the rest of the mix, which submerges itself in retro soul textures with crackling lo-fi production around the guitar, bass, organ, and piano. And that's a big problem because it feels so much more like an affectation, especially when you got the guest stars like Parker who dropped auto-tuned vocals on Crazy Over Here, and it doesn't fit at all. Take songs like the opener, Church on Sunday, with a very stilted organ line, or the lo-fi crackles all around the piano of How to Love Me. They only take it halfway here. And yeah, I get not every producer is Dave Cobb and can pull off that sort of balance, but they could have at least tried a little harder than this. I actually like some of the more contemporary R&B tunes that crop up here. The borderline G-funk touches on Stay, the sweep of the horns on Hell of a Girl or Feel Your Love. The instrumental textures, they at least match Grace's singing a little bit better. But on the other hand, sometimes the lo-fi approach just goes entirely too far, like the liquid blur of guitars on New Orleans, where it feels like she's singing on top of it rather than being blended with the mix. Or the closer, Song Cries and Amens, which tries to match her voice with a composition that feels half-formed and ends after 90 seconds. Barely a full song and not really a strong album closer. Now, granted, we now have to talk about the writing, and I will give Grace points for trying for more morally ambiguous framing, or at least putting together an interesting character. She's a flirt, she's capricious, she loves hot and fast before leaving a trail of broken hearts behind her, and yet she's just as hurt when guys can't match her passion or when they treat her the same way. And to be fair, there is some self-awareness in how she's more realistic about her relationships, that they have a shelf life, and she doesn't have a lot of patience for guys who don't pick up on that message very early on, or who through whine about it. That said, there's a limit to how far you can push this before the dramatic stakes start to get a little bit shaky, and Grace crosses that line more than a few times, and it's an issue in her delivery that's mirrored in the writing, a lack of subtlety and disaffection. It comes on very early on Hell of a Girl, which is a kiss off to a guy who left her and now wants her back, and while I appreciate the raw anger here as she's close to moving on, the already clunky hook is not as smooth as it needs to be to discard this guy. It's clear that she still does care too much. Now, it doesn't help with the framing on this album is wonky as hell. It wants to romanticize the midsection of this album where she wants real love and affection from guys who are distant or who might be cheating on her, but it's very rare that this is tempered with the self-awareness to elevate it to deeper drama. How to Love Me, it gets close with the hook, and From You has some of it too, but with the references to playing this guy like a Barbie doll, it just feels kind of capricious, and that can hurt the sincerity that shows up in the unfulfilled expectations of Say, or the waiting of New Orleans, or the frustration of Feel Your Love. It feels like the writing wants to take its cake and eat it too, and never take more responsibility for the reckless nature of the hookups, especially when it comes to romanticize the drama on all the breakup songs. Church on Sunday unintentionally might be the strongest metaphor for that concept as a whole. This is a girl who pushes away a guy who she leads on after apparently cheating on him, but now instead of actually dealing with the situation, she says she's got damage, she warns the guy away from her, and says she needs to go on Church on Sunday. On the bridge, almost blowing off that you gotta learn that love hurts sometimes. That's not an excuse for what you did here. It's also why You Don't Know Me is easily the best song on this album, because with G-Eazy's added verse, there's balance to the feminist subtext, and it comes together as a really strong modern update. Again, it's a really good song, but really, I get what this album is, particularly in the writing. It's melodrama, pure and simple, and you know what, that can work, especially in a pop framing that Grace seems to be trying here. But it's also a clash in styles and the production and the writing that really makes it a lot messier than it should be. Sorry, Grace, but it's not gonna work when you say bool, mostly because you're not a blood. Coupled with a performance that has potential, but really not the subtlety to execute well, I really did not dig this album as much as I wanted to, even despite a retro soul song that I normally really like. For me, it's a strong 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, especially if you're a fan of Amy Winehouse, but it's also one that shows a lot of work that would need to be done before I think Grace is really ready to dominate stateside. It's a pretty good record, especially as a debut, but if her biggest hit remains a cover, Grace could be in for a tough road ahead. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming up that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. I got Schoolboy Q coming up, and I also got my 3rd year anniversary. The votes are all in, and I'm not going to spoil it. You guys are going to have to just sit and wait. Otherwise, if you guys have other opinions about this album, I got the poll up here, so let me know what you thought of it. Do you think she managed to land that retro soul touch a little bit better, or do you think that it just kind of fell flat, which for the most part it kind of did for me? Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.